Perhaps a good title for this episode is Where in the World is Max? As listeners, you hear me occasionally mention that I have a son, Max, who is a physics teacher. Recently, I spoke about his efforts to go global as an international teacher. I can now tell our listeners that Maxwell is teaching overseas. Yay, Max! So yes, Max is experiencing the life of a first-timer, a newbie to international education, which means we have many questions for him. In this show, Max speaks with us about his recent recruiting, orientation, onboarding, and teaching experiences. He followed some of the standard recruiting strategies while also applying a few that showed his early life experiences with international education and travel gained while growing up as a cross-cultural kid. So whether you're thinking about making the leap to teaching overseas or are curious about what it is like for a 20-something-year-old to leave the familiarity of his family, friends, and school for new opportunities, this interview is for you. The show was recorded on October 19th, 2024. We now introduce you to Maxwell Carpenter, an intrepid first-timer with a twist who shares his adventures while answering the question of where he is in the world.
Well, hello, Max Carpenter. We've finally gotten a chance to chat with you after mentioning you a couple of times, as your dad would say. And we're going to hold off. We usually ask our guests where they are in the world. We're going to try to leave that as a little surprise for everyone at the end. But maybe you can share a little going global story from one of your experiences living overseas.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. First off, thanks for having me. I've listened to the podcast. I think it's really cool that you guys are doing this, and it's a fantastic resource for people who are interested in becoming an international teacher. This is such a great job, and I've met lots of teachers that are interested, and I'd point them to you guys. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about some of my experiences. I'm actually just coming right now. I just got home this afternoon from a 3-day hiking excursion out in the mountains as a part of the Duke of Edinburgh program, which is I think this is common throughout British schools. The school that I teach at is a British school, but it's completely new to me, and it's not something that I've seen in American schools back home. And this was just such an incredible experience. A couple of weeks in, hearing from colleagues, them giving me opportunities to just do fun things. And I got pulled into this trip. And man, I just remember being out in the mountains, looking at this incredible vista, walking past herds of cows and topography that I hadn't ever really been in before. And I was just thinking to myself, oh my God, like I'm getting paid to do this. This is part of my job. Yeah. And it was an amazing experience. I really got to know my students better and got to know my colleagues better. Got to see the country that I'm exploring, got out of the city that I'm in, got to see the country a lot better. So that's one of the most memorable things of this experience. And it's been a good example of the possibilities that I'm experiencing in an international school that are, some of the reasons why I went into international education.
That sounds like an awesome time. And like you say, it's great to get to know the kids in a different way. I'm curious if you stopped and did any physics lessons along the way.
Yes. So it's a camping trip. So they're hiking and camping. So at night they were all camping and sitting around. They had a fire set up and they were telling scary stories to each other. And I walked by and they were like, Mr. Carpenter, do you have any scary stories? And I was like, well, yes, I do. And then I go into the story. I was like, do you guys know about supernova? Because we've talked about them a little bit in our physics class. And they were like, yeah. And so I started talking about, well, if a supernova is spinning really, really quickly before it explodes, that can create a powerful magnetic field that channels all of that energy rather than dissipating in every direction. It shoots like a laser beam into space. And if there was a nearby supernova that blew up like that and was spinning and shot what we call a gamma ray burst towards Earth, it would travel almost at the speed of light. We would have no way of knowing it was coming until it hit us, and it would instantaneously vaporize half of the planet. And then,
Nice.
so that's pretty scary. So yeah, that was my scary campfire story for them. But
And everybody
yeah,
have a great sleep, right?
yeah. Some cosmic horror for them. But yeah,
Oh my. So definitely a teachable moment there, Mr. Art and Physics Teacher Man. So for people listening over the years on Instagram, I would travel places with Maxwell and we would go into art museums and art galleries and I would take pictures of him in front of art wherever we are. So I would always post to Instagram. Back then I would say art boy. Now he's art man and physics teacher man, by the way. So that's the kind of handle I've given Maxwell. And I have to smile a little bit, Max. When I texted you this past week, you go, well, Dad, I'm out in the country and I'm just scratching my head going, when are you in the school building? Because this has happened twice. And
yes,
how terrific is it that you're doing it at the beginning of the year? Because in general, I think a lot of the schools do their week without walls, their experiential learning later in the year. So that's really cool that you were able to bond even further with your students. So that's a big plus for your new school.
yeah. Yeah, my school is very big on trips. We kind of joke about it as teachers that, every week a third of your kids are off someplace. It's not quite that much, but yeah, that we're very big on field trips, different expeditions and stuff like that. And I was really supported by the head of my department because I had gone on one trip and that did mean missing a couple days of instruction, but they got coverage for me. And so here another one was coming around and I said, hey, I understand if you'd prefer for me to be here. But he said, no, this is a really good program. It's a really good way to get to know the kids better. And so he encouraged me. So they've been nothing but supportive in these opportunities.
And we'll take a deep dive on how it's been going, your orientation in just a moment. But one thing that's been really huge and you're sharing with me is the mentoring in the science department that you're getting. And that's something can be a real takeaway for new teachers going overseas to make sure they're accessing their fellow teachers in their department. And in the greater community, we always talk about there are no dumb questions, ask questions. And specifically in your place, they definitely were set up to support you in your work. All right, let's move on to our guiding question. What has your move to be an international educator look like from recruiting to onboarding to transitioning to orientation? So a big, huge whopper of a question. And now with a couple of months of international teaching experience under your belt, how's it going? So we're going to break this down into some smaller questions, with the first one being, Max, what made you decide to make the leap into international education?
This has pretty much been in the books for me since my second or third year of university. I am the son of two international school teachers, one of which is, the host of this podcast. So I've always been in the world of education. And I think growing up in international schools really instilled in me valuing knowledge, education, multiculturalism, and exploration. And so that was just baked into my identity since I was a kid. I think that's a lot of why I really got into physics when I was in high school, is I just loved science. I loved to learn. I was very curious and I was encouraged. And when I was in university, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be an educator in some capacity. I wasn't sure if I wanted to get a PhD or go into academia. But as time went on, I realized how formative my experience was towards the end of high school. And that was really when my worldview was changed and I developed my sense of identity and my understanding of the world. And I realized that that was the impact that I wanted to make on the world, was helping young people develop their worldviews and values and sense of identity through physics. In other words, I realized I wanted to teach, and I wanted to teach at that age levels towards the end of high school. And as soon as I really set on that track of wanting to be a teacher, from the beginning, I wanted to be an international teacher. I had lived the lifestyle growing up, and it combined education with, again, my other values of multiculturalism and adventure and travel. So it's been my plan for years and years and years. Post college, I knew I needed to get some experience teaching in the US. Initially, I wasn't really looking forward to that. I kind of viewed it as a step I needed to get out of the way in order to get overseas. But then I just had an incredible experience during that phase of my life, living in the same town as many of my friends, going back all the way to middle school. And so I had a really, really rich social experience there as I was learning how to be a teacher, getting through my first couple of years. And so I delayed, rather than going overseas after my second year, which was my original plan, took another year to really enjoy that time with my friends. But then over the summer, not this last summer, but the summer before that, I got the chance to teach at a summer camp in China. And as I was doing that, I was traveling, I was teaching, and I was like, this is absolutely what I want to be doing. I need to get overseas as soon as I can. And so I started going through the application process with a lot of help from my dad and others. And the application process really had some ups and downs. First off, super excitement of seeing these really big international schools that I was like, oh, I'd love to teach there, like really top schools in Bangkok. And there's one in Chile that I was very interested in. I got an interview at one, and in my head, I was like, oh, this is, I've killed the interview. I did great. I've got this in the bag. This is going to be great. And then I did not get the job. And, I'm inexperienced. I'm really at the beginning of my career. So that felt bad. And I think I could kind of like put my chips into that basket. And so after that, when that didn't come through, I wasn't approaching the application process with the same energy as I think I needed to. But I got back into it. I started applying to a lot of these other schools after the sort of first window had gone past. And even then, I was not hearing back from schools, or there just weren't openings at places that I wanted to be. And so I got a little disheartened going into the winter. And I was worried that things weren't going to work out and that it would be another year. And I was making plans for, okay, what can I do this next year to really make myself a strong candidate? But I was really fortunate. I had my profile up on Schroll. I was up on a couple of these different websites, but the headmaster at the school I'm currently at, I guess, saw my profile and sent me a message and was like, hey, we think you might be good for this position. Can you interview for it? And then from there, the interviews went great and I got the job. And that was a huge moment. It's at a school and at a place that I really wanted to go to. So that was an incredible moment.
Max, nice job. One of the takeaways for young educators, maybe in university or just out, who are thinking about going overseas is your experience having at least 2 years in the home country. I talked to multiple administrators when I was overseas about how should I coach Max with this. And they said, get that experience in the home country where he's going to get hopefully a lot of support, a lot of orientation, and he's going to learn the nuts and bolts of teaching. So that's a huge takeaway. I also know that you work with Jacqueline Millay.
Yeah.
So you were a little different than I think normal newbies. They wouldn't know to hire a coach, for example.
One thing I was going to ask you to give us a little more detail about who supported you. And you talked about some big name schools. What kind of information gathering did you do? Or, did you connect directly with schools? Did you attend a recruiting fair? Give us a little more detail, please, on your specific process. I know you said you got discouraged and took a hiatus, but what kind of things did you do as far as part of your process?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I want to say Jacqueline was extremely, extremely helpful. My dad connected me with her, and she was really, really helpful in building up my CV and cover letters as well. And I had both of those, but she was really, really helpful of just overhauling them to really target what international school administrators are looking for to make them just look more professional and more substantial. So that was really helpful. And once the recruiting season began, she was really helpful at sending out listings of whenever openings came up. And that was really, really nice. Because as I was looking at schools, the first thing that I did is I looked at, okay, what are all the countries I might really want to work in? And then I did research in those countries. What are all the international schools that are there? And then of those international schools, which ones are really reputable and look like a place that I'd like to work? Once I had those, I had a big Google sheet just set up with all these different countries and schools. And as I began the recruiting process, I was checking like every 2 or 3 days. I would just do a quick look through to see if there's openings at any of them. And anytime there was, I applied directly. That process, I did get one interview through that process at a school in Chile, but that was it. Through this whole process, I only ended up in contact with a small handful of schools. But it was through Schroll was the website where I saw many postings of international schools and I applied directly.
Yeah, I found Scroll, I don't know how you say it, but
Yeah.
I found them quite helpful with their little emails that they sent out that say, oh, here's a position in this place, this place, this place, and that tells you what all the positions are. And then if you want more information, you just click on the button. It just feels very in the moment and clear, helpful, I found. But I haven't been registered with the others to get their newsletter, but I agree with you that they were very straightforward. So you talked about some of your methods that you tried. Was a recruiting fair in your mind? Was that one of your strategies to use one of those, or was it never an issue?
I imagine it would have been wise to do. I will admit I was overconfident going into this process. And I was overconfident because I had had a lot of success applying for jobs in the US. In the US, it had been the case that pretty much every school that there was an opening for, I had interviewed and usually gotten the job. So I was overconfident. I thought, oh, we live in this digital world. Everything's going to be online. Let me just get my applications out. I'm a great candidate. Things will come through. But, this is something for young would-be international school teachers to know, is just that it's a much more competitive world, which is tough to get your foot in the door. But once you're in, you're glad it's competitive because you're surrounded by really driven, hardworking people. So, yeah, I think that the first position, in my experience, it is challenging. But yeah, I was overconfident starting off. But just to your point of attending a fair, I think I definitely would have. Now looking back at how challenging it actually was to get that first position, I wish I had done more research and gone to some fairs, because I think that, especially as a young teacher, having some face-to-face time to meet recruiters would have been good.
Yeah, that's been our feeling too, that on paper, it's tough. Even with the help of Jacqueline, who is amazing, it's tough to present yourself in a way that you will, as they say, be put in the yes pile and that you will stand out. Whereas when you meet someone face to face and can project your personality and they get to know you a little bit, and even just chatting over coffee or in the elevator, as we've said multiple times in different shows, we really are firm believers in the face-to-face as well. So for a future, that's something you can keep in mind as a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Max, you had every right to feel confident because you did back in Northern Virginia apply for these different jobs, and boom, you were offered the jobs. And you are in one of the sought after fields, science in general, and then physics. Oh my gosh. So a quick side note, I was talking to the physics teacher at my last school, and he said, in many cases, the physics teachers in schools are not trained in physics. They were biology, chemistry, and then the schools need them and they learn. And here you're coming out of an incredible program at Virginia Tech. You had a master's degree. You were a cross-cultural kid. So you had every right to be confident. But as Audrey's alluding to, and you as well, it's just tough to break through, especially that first time. So I think that's a big takeaway for our listeners trying to get into the field. All right, well, you only had a few interviews, but let's break that down a little bit about what it was like, these online interviews. How did you prepare for them? And maybe lessons learned on how you would handle them for the next time.
Yeah. One last thing I want to mention on the previous point, I think the biggest factor is just experience teaching IB. And when I put myself in the shoes of a administrator hiring for an IB physics position, and that's what I'm looking for. Of course, the person who has 3 years of teaching experience none of which is IB, is not going to be as strong as a candidate. And so that's another piece of advice I would give to people looking at international education. If you can get into an IB school and if you can teach an IB course, get some experience, that was what my resume was missing. And it's tough, but if you can find that, that's good. So to prepare for my interviews, I really looked through what are my strengths as an educator? What are things that I've done in my short career so far that make me stand out? And so thinking about clubs and extracurriculars that I had participated in or started, I thought about what are some key moments in the classroom that I can really communicate that explain who I am as a teacher and show off some of my strengths. That was a lot of my preparation. But also, I tend to interview pretty well. I'm able to, especially when I'm speaking with another physics teacher, which they usually bring in for these interviews, I can sort of talk physics with them and get across my enthusiasm and my energy. And so I kind of put some trust in that. I'll say after my first round of interviews where I was a little overconfident, after that, I did go back and I said, okay, I need to go back through a lot of the education terminology that I was taught during my master's degree that I know will resonate with these administrators and that will show that I know my stuff. And so that's where I went back and reviewed things like the 5E model for lesson design, understanding by design, social emotional learning, just like reminding myself of a lot of this education vocabulary that demonstrates that I know what I'm doing. So I went back and reviewed a lot of that. That was helpful.
Well, I'm curious. So it sounds like you really did learn about, gee, maybe I should go back and bone up a little bit on some of that stuff. Wondering how much your experience as a TCK, third culture kid growing up overseas, factored in during interviews, because that's something that we've heard from multiple sources, and Jacqueline being one of them, that these administrators are looking for someone who has the aptitude to be an international educator as well. How much did that come up?
Yes, I think that was one of the things that actually ended up getting me my job. Because I remember when I interviewed with the school that I ended up at, they were a little confused. They were like, we're a British school in this other country. You are an American who's worked in American public schools. That was their first question for me, was like, why do you want to do this? Like, this seems like a big, big change. And that's where I was able to say, I grew up in that world. I'm returning to that world. I know what it's like, and I know the values of an international school. Those are my values. For me, it's not so much going to something completely new, but returning to a culture and community that I feel as though I'm a part of. So that was really big. That did help a lot.
So you've already alluded somewhat to the feeling of being overconfident and then being disappointed that you didn't get a certain job when you really thought you had nailed the interview. What other kind of emotional process did you experience?
It was a huge up and down for me of so much excitement at the beginning of the process, getting so invested in some of these schools, like immediately, and being like seeing, oh, I could see myself being there. And then I went through this last winter when it didn't look like I was going to be overseas. And I got actually quite depressed. And I always experience seasonal depression anyway, but it's like this had been my life plan forever. And I had made incremental progress on that. And when it looked like it wasn't coming through, it sort of, hit me in my sense of identity. And I felt like I was going to be missing kind of a year of what I was planning for my life. So that was rough. But at the same time, it did kind of push me to sort of zooming out from education for a second, of reminding myself that I'm not ultimately defined by my work and that I can find value in my life wherever I am. So I was able to kind of reorient from that. But still, when it did end up coming through with the job, it was wonderful. I was just filled with excitement and immediately started trying to learn the language and researching apartments and neighborhoods and everything like that.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm really glad that it worked out for you and that you were able to begin the ride. We're excited to see where things go for you.
All right, Max, thanks for being so open, sharing that roller coaster ride that so many international teachers experience going through the recruiting process. So thank you. Let's move on to the onboarding process, that process of you've gotten your job, you're hearing from HR, administrators, in most cases, a lot of paperwork. So let's talk about how that went, and including your early decision, being able to get your housing done before you arrived. Let's talk about both of those.
Yeah, sure thing. I'm very fortunate. The HR staff at my school is amazing, and they were really, really on the ball of communicating with me and making it clear exactly all of the paperwork that I needed to send in. That was a lot of the process. My advice for new international teachers is do start that early, because for me, for example, I needed a apostilled, which is like a special stamp, more or less, that is means it's been verified by the State Department. I needed an apostilled birth certificate, but the trouble is I was born in Panama, and the State Department only apostilles American birth certificates. And so it became this whole process where I had a different form called a consular record of birth abroad that would work, but it took 16 weeks for them to process that. Yes. Yeah. And so I actually didn't get that until 2 or 3 weeks ago. Unfortunately, I was able to get started without it. But that just goes to show you you're going to be working with governmental agencies when you're getting your paperwork together, and they go really slowly. So don't leave it till the last minute. In terms of preparing for my housing, the school that I'm at doesn't provide housing, but they were really helpful in connecting me to potential apartments where I could rent. And they had several teachers that had gone off to other schools and left apartments. They had relationships with those landlords. And so they were able to say, hey, we've got 3 apartments that we think that you might like. The first apartments that they had for me were in areas of the city I didn't really want to be in. And I was kind of wringing my hands over, okay, one of these looks pretty good, but it's not exactly what I want. And then as I looked on my own at various websites, well, the websites are all in a language I don't understand. The landlords for these apartments don't necessarily all speak English. So I looked down that road, but it wasn't looking good. But I'm glad I did wait, because a month or so passed and the school came forward and said, oh, we have another teacher that dropped out. Here's their apartment. What do you think? And it ended up being exactly where I wanted to be in the city, just a really, really prime location. So I don't know. That again took a lot of attention from me, where I was looking every day at what was popping up. I was really exploring beforehand, what are these different neighborhoods like? And then finding one that was a good balance between my commute and being where I actually wanted to live.
Max, I really appreciate that you brought in your adventure spirit to that, but you also were logical. And I was trying to say, is it possible to live near the school? And one of the things that just wasn't going to work there for you being different than me, is that you wanted to experience the city.
Yeah.
You wanted to have that a part of your lifestyle. And if you had chosen a place near the school, more out in the countryside, it would have felt isolating. So you stuck to what works for you, to your identity, and you made it happen. And let's say that one hadn't come through. I really appreciate the idea that the real estate listings were in a different language. You don't know how it works to actually rent from a distance. And it isn't a big deal. Most people arrive without a place. You could have found yourself stuck in a place you really didn't like. So that was another good decision.
Yeah.
So let's look a little bit at you deciding to go early. How early did you go? How many days before you actually started your contract did you arrive?
I arrived about 3 weeks before the orientation process.
Is that something you'd recommend to people? What was that like? Your orientation experience probably was a little different from all the other newly arrived teachers. Tell us a little bit more about what you've experienced there, and then how it sort of fed into the formal orientation at your school.
Yeah, it worked out really well for me. Well, I mean, so the challenge of that decision was that the apartment that I'm in doesn't have air conditioning, and the country that I'm in is incredibly hot over the summer. So I did not really sleep well for a month, and that was awful.
Oh,
But yes, but I'm still glad I did go early because it allowed me to really set up my apartment and really settle in and get a sense of my neighborhood and sort of have the time to start looking into, okay, like, are there some clubs nearby that I could join in? Where's the gym that I want to go to? So that I had kind of settled in at least somewhat into my life outside of school before school started. And that way I was able to really focus on school when it began. So I would recommend. And also, I just got to explore the city a little bit more because the school year is busy when it starts. And being my first international school, it's a lot. It's a lot of work. And so I'm glad I got the chance to settle in beforehand.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. In some places we've gone, I'll never forget the conversation with the principal in Singapore. And I said, "So what would be the report date?" And he said, "July 20th." And I said, "Shut up." There's no way. That's so early. But once we got there, once I got used to the idea and then we got there, it gave us, like you say, so much time to look for a place and take our time on that and to get our feet wet in terms of the housing situation before we dove into the whole school situation. So I'm with you on that. It makes a lot of sense if your school will allow it, because there's been other schools we were at where we weren't allowed to go early. It was provided housing and it wasn't available until later on and so on. But I think that's a really cool approach that you took.
Yeah, it worked out very nicely for me.
Tell us a bit about the sort of formal orientation and onboarding at your school.
That ended up being relatively quick. It was only a couple of days. But that was a lot of just being introduced to other teachers in the school, which was great. Like, those became my first friends and real social connections. And there's still like a lot of people that I feel really close with at school. And then just being introduced to the different systems, the particularities of a British school, for example. It was time for me to be able to ask a lot of questions about the curriculum and stuff like that. But it felt very quick, actually. It felt more like a kind of social introduction. Here's quickly the different systems of the school. And then we dove in and we started teaching. And that was fine. The first 2-3 weeks of classes were a challenge for me because I was adapting to a completely new curriculum. In the US, as a physics teacher, I teach 11th and 12th grade. And I previously taught one standard physics class and one advanced placement AP physics class. In the British system, I'm teaching 6th graders, 8th graders, 9th graders, 10th, and 11th graders.
Woo!
It's crazy. I have 1 or 2 classes of each. And that was a huge adjustment because I had never taught kids that young before, except for like a couple weeks in my student teaching. So that was a big adjustment, but it was one that after 2 or 3 weeks, I did feel like I kind of had the hang of. And now I feel pretty good about it. And I actually really enjoy teaching those younger students as well. And it's been a great experience. And that's been a lot of what's been fun about this. As somebody who is interested in education as a subject, and especially the philosophy of education, it's really cool to see a whole different way, a whole different system and curriculum. And there's pros and cons to it. I really like that I get to see their development over the years, and I really know exactly what they know by the time they reach my IB class because I've taught the curriculum for all the preceding years. And I like the idea of being with the same group of students year after year. I think you really develop a deep understanding and connections with them. From a planning perspective, it's a little overwhelming having that many classes. Fortunately, they give a lot of planning time throughout the day, and the school made my schedule intentionally a little bit light so that I would have time to adapt, which I'm really glad that they did. So I've been okay. I've been on top of it, but it's still a lot, and it makes it difficult to really personalize and like really have super strong lessons for each class because you're planning for so many. So that's challenging.
I'm curious if you said your youngest is 6th grade. Is that physics or, is it like science at that point?
That's general science. So all of the other students are physics classes, but that's general science. And that's actually, I've really, really enjoyed that because I get to explore subjects that are fun, like cells and biology and some chemistry that I haven't necessarily seen in a while, but I get to revisit. And it's really fun teaching the young kids because they've got so much energy and everything's new to them. So I've really enjoyed that. And I appreciate the experience that it gives me, a broader lens into science education and experience to maybe, because I know a lot of international schools might want me to teach middle school classes as well, even in a non-British system.
So you're hitting on one of the themes we talk about again and again about being adaptable and flexible is what school leaders are looking for. And I really appreciate your enthusiasm and ability to say, hey, I'm going to give this a go. And what a neat experience that you're working with students this year that you're going to work with next year and so forth. So that's pretty awesome. I did want to mention back to the onboarding and moving to a new country. So we're on video right now, and I'm looking at you sitting on the bed that you made years ago, my woodworking son. And behind you are some beautiful prints. And I've seen a video of your apartment that's covered with your artwork that you painted. So one of the things, if you can get it, you had a shipping allowance, which isn't always the case, I think, especially for a lot of the schools in Europe, that you were able to bring some things that are important to you. And going overseas all by yourself, even though you're very independent, is not easy that first 3 weeks, I'm sure. But knowing that your shipment's coming through, it won't arrive right away. But you have built your own little world there, transferring a lot of things from your previous home. So that's a great idea as well that you did that, Max.
Yeah, I like having my nest. I like being able to host. A lot of what I have in my home is expressions of kind of my identity, things that I've either made or I'm really interested in. And I've got some prints from China behind me, and I've got my tea and stuff like that. So yeah, that was really nice. I think something I know you guys are interested in hearing about is the experience of uprooting and being in a new place, just starting over and coming by myself, like not having a spouse or family or friends in this new environment. And I'll say it has been challenging, but it's been a process of growth. And I've sort of experienced this week after week of really just like I'm transitioning into a new phase of my life. I miss my friends back home a lot, but I recognize that I'm growing more resilient being on my own. And I like that. I like that I'm learning to sort of regulate my emotions better myself, that I'm stepping into what feels like a much more adult phase of my life. And it's kind of bittersweet. It feels like I'm leaving behind some of my youth, of my childhood friends, really. But as part of that, I'm stepping into an adult identity that I'm really happy with. I love being a teacher, and I love being an international teacher. And my work life has been so fulfilling. It has made the transition much, much easier. I was excited about teaching internationally. It has really exceeded my expectations. Just the quality of school that I'm in, the readiness of the kids to learn, the openness of the administration for just like me to be able to have these cool opportunities, going on hiking trips, the mentorship opportunities that I've had, and the potential for growth as an educator. Something I want to mention. We have a sort of conference with 2 other international schools in Europe where we're having a professional development day. And I said, hey, I have a lot of ideas about interdisciplinary education, of looking at the connections between physics, but also the humanities, and teaching towards values in the sciences, which we usually don't think about. Can I give a presentation on this? And they gave me the go ahead, and they talked with me through it first to make sure I had something that was substantial. And then going from there to collaborating with other colleagues of talking about this idea. I have a colleague in the English department who I've been sharing ideas with. So I've just like, whereas in the US, I kind of had this feeling of like, okay, I'm teaching AP physics. There's no place really for me to go beyond that. But now overseas, I'm like, there are so many possibilities. I'm connected into this IB program, which is amazing. I'm connected with all these colleagues that I really like, I respect, and I have rich conversations with. And then there's opportunities for me to grow as an educator, not just being a better physics teacher, but looking into shaping curriculum in the future. So it's been wonderful. It's been challenging, but it has been wonderful.
You really just answered my next question. Comparing your experience so far to back in the US, and you were in a very substantial US public school system. So you've really kind of covered administrators, opportunities. How about students? Let's drill down a little bit on maybe differences in what you're seeing with the students in your current school compared to previously back in the US.
Yeah, in the US, I taught at two schools, both in one of a really, really great school district, but I taught at one very wealthy school, prestigious school in the district, and then one was, much more lower income kids, much more economically diverse school. In both places, what I kind of experienced was in my classes, I would typically have about a third of the kids that were super energized and wanted to learn and were cared about the subject and were sort of had the background to be able to really succeed academically, just the background knowledge and the skills and all that. A third that, like, if I was super enthusiastic, they would kind of jump in and they would get into it, but there'd be a lot of days that they really weren't engaged. And then a third that was completely disengaged and that were still like lovely kids and who I would still form good relationships with, but maybe it just didn't have the skills or motivation to really succeed at learning physics, which is a challenging subject. And here it's been very different. The vast majority of the students are really excited and prepared to learn. And I've had like one or two sort of motivation behavior issues with one or two students, but I realized that had more to do with me presenting the material at too advanced of a level. And so they were just lost and frustrated. But as soon as I adapted, they jumped in as well. And it really is the case that across the board, the students at my school are willing and able to learn. And that has been just kind of a night and day difference between teaching in the US and here. It's been great. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. And I think that's been similar to the experience of a lot of people that go international, that just the level of interest and engagement of the students is higher. So let's move to life outside school. You
Mhm.
suggested that you looked into joining a gym, maybe clubs. Tell us a little bit more about what you're doing to make friends, engage in the local culture, and just have fun.
Yeah. And I'm basically at the end of month 2 being here. This has been the more challenging component so far of making friends in a new city where I don't speak the language and I don't have any existing social connections. One of the challenges is that I'm a much younger teacher at my school. Many of the teachers have families. So although I've made a ton of great friends at school with other teachers, most of them live much closer to the school, which is way out at the outskirts of the city, and they have families. So it's been hard for me to hang out with them outside of school. At first, I was just kind of like throwing myself out into nightlife and into museums and stuff, just hoping I would kind of meet people and I could make some friends just kind of like being out and going dancing and talking to people and all that. And I would meet people and we'd be friendly, but that wouldn't turn into seeing them much afterwards. I realized that in order to make social connections, you need to be seeing the same people with some sort of regularity. And so from there, I was like, okay, I need to be joining clubs where I can be seeing people more than just once. And so I've joined two running clubs. And that's great. I think young people are realizing that we can't just do everything digitally. Like you have to show up in person to socialize. And so there's been this huge movement. You see it on social media of people going out to these running clubs. That's kind of the it place to go to meet other young people. And sure enough, I have met a handful of people that I do like and that I'm beginning to become friends with. But I'll also say it's challenging to find people that really have shared interests and are the same, like open minded, curious. It's tough to break into. And I'm very optimistic. I see the pathway forward that I will continue to get closer to people and make friends. But that has been the most challenging part of this so far is that it just takes time. But I mean, that being said, I'm getting tea with somebody that I met at a running club a couple of weeks ago who is a really interesting person. So I have one or two real social connections and I see how it's going to grow from there. But I'd say that that's where, for me, it's taken the most sort of like resilience of recognizing that it's a slow process to make friends in a new city.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say too. It's early days, 2 months in, you've got plenty of time. It will come.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you're making some great efforts and choices, and I'm excited for you to see where it goes.
Thank you.
So, Max, let's do the reveal. What city are you in right now?
I am in Rome. I'm in Rome, Italy.
Yay!
Yes.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
And what school are you at?
I am at St. George's British International School of Rome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And Audrey, where were you and Mark? You were at the American school?
Yeah, it's called the American Overseas School of Rome. Have you heard of it, Max?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark wanted me to say that he coached soccer over at St. George's, so he's been there.
Yeah.
But yeah, we really had a great time in Rome. Tell us, you're loving being there. How's your Italian? Have you made inroads?
Yes, I've picked up a couple phrases. I can now have about a 2-minute conversation with people, just kind of saying who I am, where I'm from, and some stuff like that. So, yeah, making some progress there. This is such a cool city to be in. I feel really fortunate that this is my first job because I've got like 6 or 7 cities I really wanted to live in anyway, and this is one of them. It's got so much history, just rich culture. It's beautiful. The food is delicious. And it's a staging point to travel across Europe, which is a continent that I've actually seen less of. So it's been really wonderful. The weather's amazing.
And friends will come visit. It's the kind of place where friends will make the effort to come.
Yeah. Yeah. I do have one friend. It's at my school's half term, which is a week-long break, about 6, 7 weeks in. And I do have a friend that's visiting Italy. So that'll be really nice.
Yoo-hoo! Well, Max, I'm so excited for you that you're in Rome and we have that common connection. And thank you. I know you're really busy with all those different preps and the field trips and so on. So we really, really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. And now our audience has finally met Max. Woohoo! So it feels like we've achieved one of our major goals here, and we're just so excited for your ongoing adventures. So we'll have you back on in a few more months and see how things are going. So thanks again.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Max, speaking as your dad, I'm always so proud of you. And just like you're saying, you are stepping into the next part of your life. You've always been mature, wise in many ways, an explorer, and so much adventure is in front of you right now. And I couldn't be happier that you're an international educator. And I'll be back. I was in Rome this past year before you got there. I'll be back before you know it. So thank you, son. This has been so helpful for our audience and very heartwarming for me. You are an incredible young man.
I am following in your footsteps, Dad. Like, this is the life that you made possible for me. So I'm so thankful. I love you, Dad. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify. And let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.